So we will start a new panel for today, the second of the day, language and voice. The first speaker is Gala Maria Follaco, and she's associate professor of Japanese at I don't know about the pronunciation, sorry, at l'Orientale University of Naples. And she has translated the works of several Japanese writers and published articles on urban representation in modern and contemporary Japanese literature. She published a monograph, which title is A Sense of the City, Modes of Urban Representation in the Works of Nagai Kafu, in 2017. And in this book, she examines Nagai Kafu's literary construction of urban spatialities from the late 1890s to the late 1890s, yes, to the late 1930s. And her most recent publications include the article A Soundscape of Urban Modernity, Voices and Din in 1874 on Joki in Harvard Journal of Asiatic Studies. And she's accompanied by Satomi Ura. She's a PhD candidate at Meisei University. No, sorry, it will be for the next talk. Very sorry. So, Gala Maria, you can start.
Thank you for your presentation. No, I am unaccompanied. I'm on my own. Thank you, Jeremy and Chiharu for putting together this wonderful conference. I only had a chance to listen to some of the presentations, but it was really a lot of food for thought. So thank you very much. I guess my presentation is going to be a little bit different from those I could listen to so far, because I am a specialist of literature, so I do not work on sound, on music primarily, even though I'm really interested in the topic. So I hope you will just bear with me as I will talk about literary works and texts and so forth. So this presentation is actually part of a broader project on sound in literature, and more precisely on literary soundscapes. Oh, I'm sorry, I just forgot to share the, I'm sorry, I just forgot to share the screen. So I think you should see it now. I'm sorry about that again. So yes, I usually work on sound in literature. I am particularly interested in literary soundscapes, and I've been working on this for several years now. And the premise of this project of mine is that the analysis of sound representation can be a useful tool for finding and decoding the multiple layers of meaning within a text. Textualized sounds play a significant role in the ideological representation of people, spaces, and communities, bringing to the surface tensions, conflicts, and contradictions. As Sam Halliday has put it, literature is especially well suited for revealing such parasonic factors as sounds, social connotations, its relationships with other senses, and perhaps most importantly of all, the qualitative dimension that means certain sounds are actually of interest to people, things they actively seek out or shun, end quote. And Hans Jonas also discusses sound and what he terms the nobility of sight, so its primacy over the other senses, stressing the inherent transience of sound and the fact that hearing, unlike sight, is, as he put it, wholly governed by succession. He observes that sound exists in sequence, every now of it vanishing into the past while it goes on. And also that transience is of the very essence of the now of hearing. For this reason, in my opinion, sounds appear particularly effective in representing fast-changing environments, fast-changing situations, and fleeting sensations rather than solid facts. So all this applies to Higuchi Ichiyō, who is the writer my paper deals with, in several ways. First of all, she's one of the most representative writers of the second decade of the Meiji period, which was a phase of significant change in many domains of public and private life. A condition that makes it appropriate for a mode of narration that, as we have just seen, values impermanence and transience. Second, as a writer, she is often considered a liminal figure between two very different ways of conceiving a literature. Her early works highlight a dynamic relationship with the classics, which remain an important point of reference until the middle of her very short career, when her writing matures and takes on more original and modern characteristics. Ichiyō is generally regarded as a writer who entrusts external elements in later works, or the practice of quotation in the early ones, with the function of expressing emotions and thoughts that in later decades would find a space for representation and investigation in the introspective narratives of the I novel. In my opinion, the elements entrusted with such representation include sound elements, understood here as both sound and noises, and also voices. So I will focus in particular on oral representation in two short stories. Yamizakura, Flowers at Dusk, which was published in 1892, and Yamiyo, translated in English as Encounters on a Dark Night, published in 1894. So in these works, Ichiyō attaches multiple symbolic meanings to the acoustic items, giving the text a multi-layered structure which conceals a secondary narrative of inequality, oppression, and a sense of inadequacy beneath the events occurring. These two short stories, understudied so far, reveal traces of her representation of the feminine and the poor as forgotten categories within the context of the powerful discourse on progress and social advancement that we all know as risshin shusse. So drawing upon the idea of some major theorists of sound and voice in literature, like Mikhail Bakhtin and Adriana Cavarero, I will try to show how Ichiyō identifies voice with agency and the silencing of women and the poor alongside their objectification through speech as the greatest form of repression. So first of all, let me just summarize very briefly the storyline for both stories, as they're not widely known. So Yamizakura, Flowers at Dusk, was Ichiyō's debut work, published in 1892 in her mentor Nakarai Tosui's magazine, Musashi no. It was a very important magazine at the time. In the first part of his wonderful monograph on Higuchi Ichiyō, the American scholar Robert Lyons-Danley extensively explores how some of Higuchi's themes were influenced by Nakarai's style, especially genres such as ninjōbon or nakibon. These genres often revolved around unrequited love between virtuous young women and irresolute yet irresistible iro otoko.
I'm sorry,
yes,
Maria, I'm sorry to interrupt you. It seems like the slide doesn't work or doesn't.
Yes, no, it's normal. It's just
okay.
No, it's not supposed to.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Okay. No, you're welcome. I'm sorry, I didn't prepare many slides, but this is just for summarizing.
Okay, thank you.
No, you're welcome. Thank you. I'm sorry. So according to Danley, Yamizakura aligns with this melodramatic tradition, centering on a young girl who seemingly succumbs to love sickness for her childhood friend and neighbor. However, Higuchi's skill elevates the story beyond the expected melodrama, making it surprisingly engaging and impactful. The narrative follows two neighboring families, the Sonodas, whose son Ryonosuke is preparing to enter university, and the Nakamuras, who dote on their 16-year-old daughter, whose name is Chiyo, and she's the real main character of the short story. The central conflict arises as Chiyo transitions into womanhood and wrestles with her feelings toward Yonosuke. She fears he may still see her as a child, even as her emotions for him deepen in ways she doesn't fully understand. And this would be a motif in Higuchi's work. This inner turmoil leaves her unable to confide in him, and the strain ultimately leads to her falling ill. When Ryunosuke visits her, he becomes aware that Chiyo's feelings for him have grown beyond friendship. Tragically, the story ends with the implication that she dies, her decline unstoppable despite his realization of her feelings. This brief yet emotionally charged tale unfolds across 3 concise scenes, demonstrating Higuchi's ability to infuse depth and poignancy into a seemingly simple plot. Moving on to Yamiyo, so Encounters on a Dark Night, it also has 2 main characters, male and female, whose names are Naojiro and Orang. It tells the story of Naojiro's gradual transformation into the instrument of Oran's will. Elsewhere, in an article I published a couple of years ago, I have argued that Naojiro is the body through which Oran puts her thoughts into practice, thus through which she exercises her freedom. Naojiro is a poor young man who collapses in front of Oran's house and is rescued by her servants. The house is gloomy and decaying, reminiscent of Yugao's very famous residence in the Tale of Genji. So in the opening passage, Oran is described as follows, and I quote, "Unlike Yugao, she was possessed by no demons, yet her existence was a strange and lonely one," end of quote. A depiction that anticipates the subsequent and dramatic exacerbation of her strangeness and loneliness. Oran blames Namizaki, a wealthy man who was both her romantic interest and her father's business partner, for driving her father to suicide. Namizaki had conducted some illicit business for which her father was held responsible, and ultimately this led to his tragic demise, while Namizaki prospered and even managed to marry into the aristocracy. Oran wants revenge, but this does not emerge in any meaningful ways until she meets Naojiro. Oran confesses to him that she wishes to kill Namizaki, but she cannot do it with her own hands. Naojiro agrees to do so, as he now feels as a part of Oran, as the two have become one, which also explains why they both disappear after the assault, and we have no idea what happens to them next. In Higuchi Ichiyō's writing, we find, in my opinion, oral elements of 3 kinds. At least I think those are the most important. We have voices that are often connected to agency and freedom. We have the sounds of nature, and we have the tolling of bells. We have many bells in Higuchi Ichiyō's writing. In her stories, subjugation is presented as silence, while speaking one's thoughts entails consolidating selfhood and taking responsibility. Voices, especially when conceived as rumors, as gossip, can suppress desire, experience, and so forth, denying freedom and space to the individual. All this is closely connected with the topics she cares most about, especially at the beginning of her career. First, the ability to identify, the ability to live, thus to voice one's own feelings. Society or community as systems conditioning the individual. And the private dimension of emotions that in her works is rendered through the sounds of nature, thus through poetic stratification, because usually sounds of nature always have a reference in classical poetry. But also the sounds of the paysage, the urban paysage, including very often bells, as I said. So I make a distinction between voice and sound in her writing because I think that the former voice is characterized by relationality, uniqueness, and iconicity, thus can be considered in terms of broadness. So voices broaden the space of the narrative. while sound is marked mainly by cultural sedimentation, by poetic sedimentation, and its main attribute is deepness. So when someone hears a sound, this sound takes the someone somewhere deeper in their own conscience, in their own consciousness. In Yamizakura, we find for the first time a motif that we will find in many later works, that of the outsiders who, without having any right to do so, voice the feelings of the protagonists, or rather what they believe to be their feelings, based on their prior ideas and patterns of thought. In this way, they stifle the existences of the young characters and deny them the opportunity to understand such feelings and to experience them fully. So all this in the text is rendered in the form of voice, which propagates by relying on its great relational power. What is most interesting, however, is that in the text, the voices are not presented as content. It is not specified what they actually say, but they appear precisely as voices, incorporated in the text as phone, as non-signifying sounds, contributing to the acoustic environment that surrounds Shio's story, rather than because of the meaning they convey. So we're not told what these voices actually say. We're just told that there are voices pondering on her feelings, whatever those feelings are. The text, in other words, speaks of voices and does not dwell on what they say, but this doesn't prevent stressing of these voices the impact of the protagonist's life. So this vocal overproduction is contrasted with Chiyo's refusal to speak in certain situations. For example, when she doesn't want to say her own name, and her refusal to listen to Ryonosuke, emphasizing how the sound of his voice is capable of triggering reactions. As in the following passage that I have written in the slide. Where had they come from, these new feelings of hers? Yesterday, she hadn't noticed them. Now she was so unsure of herself. The world around her had turned pitch dark. The sound of his voice seemed to penetrate her very being. End of quote. Or later on, and again, she hated him. She didn't want to hear his voice again. She didn't want to see him anymore. The sight of him, the sound of his voice, would only fan the fire in her heart. End of quote. And again, how she longed to see him. Yesterday, she would have said it openly. She blamed herself for a predicament. She would not speak his name or mention his family, and it only made things worse. Clearly, something must be done. This last note clarifies further the connection between agency and voice. Something has to be done, and so someone has to speak out, someone should talk. Likewise, when she has to ask the man she loves to leave, to go away, Chiyo does so through others, showing a need for mediation that can only be explained in one way. Speaking implies taking responsibility. So through this use of the vocal element, the potential of voice in terms of agency is emphasized. People act or do not act to the extent that they provide themselves with an acoustic presence that marks their participation in the vicissitudes of the community. Voices as rumors are a central feature of Yamiyo as well, which presents a further element of interest for oral analysis. The narrative takes place almost entirely in the dark, in dimly lit or shaded environments. This is a dual function. First, it emphasizes the gradual unification of the two characters. In fact, the shadow motif cyclically returns to characterize the figure of Naojiro, who has a diminishing presence as he is gradually absorbed by Oran. This explains why, in the text, he repeatedly complains that he is not being heard. Did anyone hear what I say? He often says in the text. And it also explains why Oran scolds him for not talking enough. And there's a part of the text that says very clearly, Naojiro, why are you so quiet about yourself? Don't make me do all the talking. It's your turn to tell me something. So in a way, she wants him to act. The second function of shadow is this, that this pervasive presence has the effect of adding depth to the acoustic dimension of the scenes reenacted. The fact that visual aids are only partial means that the acoustic effects are amplified, placing the reader in a passive position if, as Ichiyō argues, hearing is the most passive sense. And then the scholar says, we cannot close our ears as we can our eyes. We feel more vulnerable to sound. Hearing has the connotation of passivity, receptivity, that seeing doesn't have, end quote. So this is exactly the condition of passivity in which Naojiro finds himself at the time he first meets Oran. In bed, still dazed from the accident that left him unconscious for some time, he's joined by Oran, whom he has never seen before, and who manifests herself in the form of a voice. And I recorded a quote. The voice echoed in his head. Who was she? For these gentle words of hers, she was ready to bow down. He was ready to bow down before her. End quote. A few more days pass, and Naojiro finally regains consciousness. His first thought, of course, goes to the voice that so captivated him. And I quote, still, he wondered if the soft, soothing voice had actually been real, end quote. However, when he gets to know the woman, that is when he sees her, he perceives a clear difference between her sonorous self-revelation, to borrow Cavarero's very effective expression, which is the idea of her inspired by the sound of her voice and her words, and her visible form, which is much more severe and intimidating. Having reached this point, however, Naojiro cannot turn back. He and Oran will gradually become one being. He will continue to be unheard, and there's a part of the text when the servant of Oran's house admonishes him, telling that nobody's going to hear you, and also speechlessly usually listen to his interlocutors. And she will continue with her voice to bewitch him until she convinces him to expose and sacrifice himself for her. The character of Naojiro is, because of his poverty and the awe that Oran instills in him, a quintessential subjugated character, the one who neither has freedom of action nor can aspire to have it, and in fact acts only on behalf of Oran. It is no accident, then, that Ichiyō describes him as silent, while presenting Oran as a character made mostly of voice. It is not so much the sense of her words that bewitches Naojiro, but her acoustic presence, her ability to fill space with the reverberations of her voice. As one who is provided with such a voice, Oran is endowed with agency, but as a woman who has fallen into misery, there is no other way she can exert it. With the power of her voice, she urges Naojiro to act on her behalf, and he, who is the one who acts, is nonetheless not endowed with agency, since his choices are governed by someone else. So, in conclusion, I would like to say what is like the main inspiration for these ideas of mine. And of course, there's Michael Bakhtin, who recognizes that in literature, especially in rhythmic poetry and prose, sound serves an aesthetic function. The musicality of the text is not a mere ornament, but a structural aspect that contributes to meaning, while prosody, and so intonation, pause, and rhythm, plays a key role in evoking emotions and constructing the narrative world. He invites consideration not only of semantic content, but also of the phonetic, intonational, and musical dimensions of language. This approach is particularly relevant in the analysis of poetry, of course, but also of works in which the sonority of the text is central. Just think about Joyce or Proust. The dialogue between sound and sense becomes a fertile field for exploring the dynamics between author, characters, and of course, readers. Bakhtin's insight is a further evidence of the fact that sound in literature is not only aesthetic, but also intrinsically linked to the cultural and social dimensions of language. Ichiyō's rendering of aural elements is an example of this notion because for her, voices are not only a metonymic representation of words, but also contribute in their physicality and inherent characteristics to generating narratives. So today I focused particularly on voices in my presentation, but a textual rendering of other sound elements, from the sounds of nature to the ringing of bells, also shows that she had sensed the potential of such elements as generator of meaning and not as mere ornaments. Thank you.